Welcome back to another Power Query tutorial slash series. Alrighty, so it's been a very long time since we've covered anything related to Power Query, but if you watched my previous video, you now know that I was doing a little bit of a task related to one of my repos that I had just built, and basically what I was trying to do was I was trying to automate the process of building file paths, building URLs, and just trying to get different information from some of the endpoints that I was working with. And what ended up happening is I started going down this rabbit hole of just exploring a lot of different things in Power Query, more specifically related to working with JSON data, working with records in more detail, working with tables and records at the same time, working with bulk API requests, just lots of different things that I think most people would probably find useful at some point. So yeah, maybe this specific example might not be completely relevant to you, but ideally what I want you to take away from these next few videos is just some of the tricks that I was using or just some of the different things I was doing in order to get the information that I needed in the format that was specified. So very helpful, and honestly, I felt like I learned more in the last 2 days on Power Query than I've learned in probably the last 4 months. But it's just been a very interesting learning experience. Hopefully, some of you guys take away my own little findings and use it in your own little projects. Also, I apologize in advance if it sounds like it's humming. My AC will go on and it's just loud. So I'm sorry in advance if you're hearing that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the data sources that we're going to be trying to work with. All right. So I already have like a finished one, but to give you an idea of kind of just, different things that we're working with, the GovInfo API has a bunch of different data related to mostly congressional information. So things like different Congress bills that are being worked on. They also have some budgets, and I think they even have Federal Register and actually stuff like that. So, but it's mostly supposed to be, I guess, related to what is it? Congressional data. But other than that, there's just a ton of information. It comes in either JSON format or XML format. And what we're going to be doing is pulling this information using Power Query. The only reason I'm focusing on this particular API is because there's no authentication protocol. So normally if you're working with an API, you do have to be a little bit aware that if you're going to be doing things and it has an authentication protocol, it can become definitely a little bit more challenging. But if you're working with APIs that don't require that, say GitHub, for example, you don't need to go through a full authentication process in order to get it to work. In that situation, you actually can start using Power Query and stuff like that. So very helpful, very nice to know. But ideally what we're going to be doing is grabbing this information. So the first thing I do want to show you is I already have a JSON file that we're going to be loading. And so we're going to be taking that JSON file and getting the information that we need from it. I just have to remember where I put it. No. I think I put it in. Oh yeah. I think it's this one. Oh wait, no, what am I talking about? It's where did I put it? Data. It's the Congress one. Resource, no, not that one. Data sources, responses. There we go. So there is a JSON file that has information that looks like this, and these are just simply basically links to folders that are on different topics related to the GovInfo API. And so what we're going to first do is load this JSON document into Power Query, and then we're going to use it as our basis to then pull all the additional links here and get the information from those ones as well. So that's really the goal, is load this document, and then we're going to build a couple custom functions to make API calls, transform and aggregate that data as necessary, and then basically have a master data set. So that's basically the goal. So with that being said, if you haven't already, you need to open up your Excel application and open a new workbook. And then from here, what I'm going to be doing is creating a new Power Query. And then from this one, I'm going to be brave, and I'm actually going to do it from a blank query. So if you go from other sources all the way down to the bottom, you'll see blank query. And then from here, you get nothing. And you're like, ugh, what am I supposed to do with this? Fear not, my friend. Just go to your View tab right here, and then your Advanced Editor. And then I wish I could make this bigger. I'm really sorry. It just won't let me. So I'm sorry in advance if this looks too small. I wish I could make it a little bit bigger, but hopefully you guys can see this. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to grab our JSON document. So that's actually pretty straightforward. You can do JSON.document, and then we're going to be loading it from a file. And so what you do is you use the file.contents method, and then from here you need to specify the file path. Now I already showed you where my file is at, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply copy that from my file explorer. So if you go to Home and then copy path, you can just drop that little sucker right in there. You don't want double quotes, you just want single quotes. And then ideally, we should get something. Perfect. So at this point, we now have a list object, or sorry, more specifically, a record object. And what we're going to do is we're going to convert that record into a table. And so again, we're going to write the code ourselves because we're brave. And so from here, I'm going to say convert to table. That is record, and then it's going to be to table, record to table. And then I'm going to pass in the result of my previous, step or my previous function. And then if I want to see the result of that, I can just put it in the in section of our code. So here, convert to a table. So now we have a name column and a value column. Note that this one is a list. So really, we need to expand this column, which is really a list. It's a column of list objects. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to expand our column, expand our list column. And what that's going to look like is we'll create a new variable that represents this step, and we're going to call it expand columns. We're going to call our table, object, and then we'll say expand list column. We're going to pass in the last step, and then we're going to specify which column from this table has the list. Well, if you remember, it's the value column that has the list. So that should expand the list one. So what we'll do is we'll see what this one gives us. Perfect. So now we've got a column of record objects. So we just converted it from a list to now a column of records. So a column of a list, and then now to a column of a record. Now comes the fun part. Now we've got to expand each one of our records. So expand the records in the column. So this I can't tell you how many times I do this, especially when I'm working with Power Query. So again, just like the previous one, there is a expand record column this time. This one's a little bit more, so we need to specify the table. Well, we're going to take the result of our previous step. And in this case, it's still the value column, but now we need to give them field names. Now, there's a couple different names in here, and just for the sake of time, I'm not going to type out each one. I'm just going to take the ones that I already have. And so this one is the merge one, I believe. All it's really doing is it's just converting the names. It's not doing anything fancy. So I'll make it a little bit more readable. So values, and then like that. Okay, perfect. So all it does is it's going to expand each one of these. Expands the value in the record column. So we have the field names, and then it's going to do the column names. So sometimes that happens when you expand it. So if you already have, for example, like a name column, and then you try to expand it, well, behind the scenes, what's happening is it's actually going to rename all the columns. Now in this situation, it's just renaming it like so. So let's see what this one gives us. That's why that's basically that last line right here. This is really the renaming operation. This is really, hey, what fields do you want to expand from that record? Perfect. So now we've got our name, all the different columns. So pretty neat, right? We're definitely making a lot more progress, and it's starting to look more like a data set that we can start working with, but we still have lots to do. Alrighty, so the next step is we are going to then rename the columns. Just, again, for readability, rename the columns. And just like the last step, just because it's a very tedious operation, I'm just going to take some code that I already have. So I'm going to call this step rename table. I'm going to call that table object, and then there's a rename columns method. And then in this case, my table is going to be my expand records step, so the table from that step. And then I need to have my rename. So it's a list of lists, where the first name in that first item in that first list is the column name, and then after that it's the name that you want it to be. I'll explain a little bit more when we see it in person. Again, I'm really sorry if you guys are having a hard time seeing this. I will be posting this to GitHub, so again, I'm very sorry in advance. But you can see here, hopefully, is this one, name. I'm going to change that to category. Name one, I'm going to change that to folder name. So it's a list of lists, and then in the inner list, the first element is the old name, the second element is the new name. All right, so let's see what this one gives us. Woo! Okay, so it looks a lot better. There actually was one missed, but I will explain that one later. It's because I'm getting rid of it, so I don't care about it. All right, so then from here, what we're going to do is we're now going to parse that date time column. And so we're going to say parse the date time, not data time, the date time column. So this, again, I do this a ton in Power Query, which is I'm taking strings and I'm converting them to the proper date. You've got to be a little bit careful with this one, because if it comes in as a date time, there is no there is a date time parse option, but for whatever reason, it wouldn't give it to me. So I had to do initially a date parse and then a time parse, and then I would merge the two. But then and then I looked at the code and I'm like, well, wait a minute, this one's like doing it right the first one, but then there's like this outer function where it was like taking just the time from the date time parsing. I was like, no, just don't take the time, just leave it the way it is. So I'm going to call this one parse date time. And then in this one, it's going to be a table. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a column to that table. And then this one, we're going to take the previous step, which is rename table. The new column name is modify date time. And then the next one. So this is the column generator. This is basically like a little function that we're going to apply to each row in that column. And so from here, what we're going to do is we're going to say each. And then so basically for each row in that table within this column, we'll see in a second, date time from, and then I'm going to specify the column that I want it to come from. Formatted, last, modified, time. And then the type is a date time. Let's take just a couple seconds to kind of go over here. So I'm going to add a column. This is the previous step. So this is the table that I'm going to apply this function to. The new column name is going to be modified date time. For each row in this table, grab the formatted last modified time. I'm going to copy it from here because I don't trust my spelling. Grab that column and then create a date time from it, and then make sure that this column is a date time data type. So initially what it was doing is it was doing time, I think like time from date time or something like that. Date time from, I can't remember. But anywho, it was doing like another one. I'm like, no, just leave it the way it is. And then there's date time with time zone. This doesn't have time zone information in it, at least I don't think it does. So I don't care about the time zone, but keep in mind there is that option as well. So this should now create that new column, ideally, if it worked. Okay, so keep in mind whenever you add a column, it puts it to the end. So this is a lot better. So now it's a date time, and then we can see everything looks nice and dandy. So very happy with that. This is, again, really helpful whenever it comes to working with adding a column and then doing complex operations like text functions or date times or whatever. Really look at the documentation and see if you can just simplify it, because sometimes Power Query will add extra steps it doesn't need. Okay, then from here, we're going to remove some old columns. These are just columns that we're not working with, so I don't really care about them. And from this one, I'm going to call this the cleanup step. This one is going to be the table dot remove columns. It's going to be the parse date time. That's the input. And then I need to specify the ones that I want to get rid of. So in this case, I want to get rid of that one. And then I want to get rid of the file extension. Yes. So this is going to remove those columns. So I should now have 2 less columns in my table. Okay, looks a lot better. So much happier. Perfect. Okay. So we're gonna leave it for here right now. Okay, so I'm gonna basically say at this point, this particular data set is okay with. The next ones are a little bit different, but it's okay. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail when we get there. But the next video, we're gonna talk about building some functions. So this one's not done yet, but it's set up enough to where we can jump over to the other ones. And so the other ones, we're going to be building custom functions to get these particular URLs and then basically redo the steps that we had done in this one, but we're going to make it as a function. So if you have any questions at this point, by all means, ask away. Again, I'm very sorry if it was hard to read. The code will be up there on GitHub. So don't worry if you had a hard time reading it. I would recommend, if you haven't already, you can always put it in full screen mode temporarily, and then you should be able to see it ideally. Or you can be like me sometimes and just watch YouTube videos on TV, even coding tutorials. That's what I do. But yeah, I'm sorry again in advance. It's just the editor doesn't work and I can't do it in VS Code because there's no IntelliSense and I don't remember all the syntax. Alrighty, but yes, if you have any questions, by all means, put them down in the comments below. Otherwise, we will see you in the next video.